Late one autumn, not too long ago, I started chatting with a guy I'll call Aaron through a dating app. I lived in a city by the coast, let's say Westport, while he said he was from somewhere inland but working near me for a while. Aaron told me he was 27, just a few years older than me, and after a day or two of relaxed messages, he wanted to meet for coffee and drinks in town. I remember getting ready, kind of nervous, but mostly excited. Looking back, there was already something off, but it just felt like regular first date jitters. He showed up at the main train station in a crisp jacket and shiny shoes, wrapped in a long, dark coat. Right away, Aaron seemed much more affectionate than I expected. He gave me a big hug, kissed my cheek, and held my hand almost as soon as we said hi. I just figured maybe this is how he shows excitement, or maybe his background was a little different than mine. That made sense in the moment. He picked out a quiet lounge nearby, much fancier than I was used to. Aaron said he'd take care of the bill and said he wanted to give me a good night. I work as a daycare assistant, so I don't usually go to that kind of bar, but he made it clear he wanted to treat me. Half an hour in, Aaron was doing most of the talking. His words came smooth. Everything sounded well rehearsed. His life growing up between different countries, family drama, losing a parent at a young age, even being adopted by relatives across an ocean. He told stories about his struggles, how he found his way to the city, and how grateful he was for his life now. In my mind, I noticed he checked a lot of boxes: charming, successful, and open. Part of me ignored the way he kept steering the conversation to our life stories and past pain. I had also gone through a tough childhood, and it was easy to open up to someone who instantly got it. That night was full of close moments, discussing dreams, laughing about small things, and finding common ground everywhere. Aaron said he loved to dance, especially salsa, and I admitted it was something I always wanted to learn. He asked if I wanted to keep the night going at his apartment, but was careful to say there was no pressure. Against my better judgment, I found myself saying yes, not because of anything he said, but because something about him just drew me in. Aaron's place was tidy, but filled with travel photos and books. He put on music, made us drinks, and we danced a little, joking and stumbling in the middle of his living room. It all felt surreal and slightly rushed, like parts of a movie scene stitched together. Things did get a bit heated, but I stuck to my plan not to move too quickly. Later, we fell asleep fully dressed, and he called a car for me the next morning. Over the next few days, something shifted. Aaron started acting more intense, showering me with sweet messages, buying gifts even though he barely knew me. He sent me new earrings, birthday presents, and out of nowhere booked a trip for us to his hometown. He wanted it to be a big surprise. He even brought up fancy plans: dinner at a private place, flights, boat rides, and endless perks. I told myself maybe he just liked grand gestures, but a small voice inside felt uneasy. Around this time, I realized I barely knew who Aaron really was. His social media was strangely empty. No friends, only old photos, and no sign of family. I asked him questions, and his answers were always vague or hurried, as if he'd already moved on to the next topic. A name he used for his payment app didn't match the one he gave me. It made me think twice about everything. Curiosity turned to concern. My roommate helped me check out his background, searching every detail he'd shared. We found a photo tagged years ago with a woman, possibly his ex, and some comments hinting at a long relationship. After more digging, we connected enough dots to suspect a whole lot of his story was off. When I asked to see his ID before joining him on the trip, the photo he sent had parts blacked out, but his real birthday was still there. He was 9 years older than he'd claimed. Still,
I decided to see just how deep the deception went. Aaron kept changing travel plans, always blaming work or family emergencies right before our supposed flight. He made up new stories each time we talked. Then came another dramatic turn. His quote-unquote grandmother fell suddenly ill, so he had to leave the country. The timing was suspicious. I tracked down the woman from the tagged photo and sent her a careful message. She responded, and it turned out she had been married to Aaron in another country. She filled me in on years of odd and sometimes scary behavior, controlling, manipulative, financially irresponsible. After their divorce, she said more women reached out to her through mutual connections, all with eerily similar stories. Aaron wooed them, spent their money, and copied the same personal tales to win their trust. Piece by piece, it all lined up. His jobs, his past, the age differences, all false. There was never a shipping job or foreign degree. The women he left behind told stories of him disappearing for days, asking for money, and turning cold once he got what he wanted. The yacht cruise, the jewelry, the fancy plans, likely paid for by whoever was next in his line. Once I found out the truth, I stopped answering his calls and messages. Aaron tried to reach me everywhere, texts, online, even from new accounts. I played along just long enough for a little closure, told him I was out in a tiny country town, and suggested he could come visit if he wanted to talk. He said yes, traveled hours, sent proof he'd made it, and I let him wait there alone at the station, in the rain. That was my way of ending things, letting him feel just a fraction of the confusion and isolation he'd left with so many others. It was a strange relief to finally block him everywhere, but I was still shaken by how easily someone could give off such a well-crafted persona. Looking back, the signs were clear. Too intense, too soon, stories that didn't add up, and the desire to rush intimacy and trust. Aaron's pattern repeated over and over, leaving a trail of doubts and questions in his wake. One thing I learned: if your instincts keep whispering to be careful, listen to them. Looking up his name later, I realized I wasn't the first person to cross his path, but I hope by sharing this, someone else might catch on a little earlier. If you ever recognize Aaron's pattern, or anyone else's that sounds similar, trust your gut and don't let curiosity overpower your own safety. Meeting someone like that taught me to be cautious, no matter how charming or interesting they seem. I try to remind myself and others, don't feel guilty for double-checking stories or walking away if you feel uncomfortable. Sometimes a small doubt is worth listening to, even if nothing feels wrong on paper. For anyone out there going through something similar, you're not alone, and it's always better to be safe than sorry.
It's been several years since all that happened, but every now and then I still get messages from women who found me through old posts or screenshots. Sometimes I wonder why I'm sharing the story now, after so long. Maybe it's because the man I'm about to tell you about is still out there, still pretending, still looking for someone new. Back then, my life was pretty quiet. I lived in a modest little house just outside a small town somewhere in the Midwest. I worked part-time at a veterinary clinic and was studying to become a dental hygienist. My days were routine, and I wasn't really looking for anything or anyone new. That's why meeting him felt so unexpected. I met a man, let's call him Trevor, at a small gathering with mutual friends one summer. Trevor wasn't the kind of guy who demanded attention or made a scene. Instead, he had this calm, easy way of making you feel like you'd known him forever. He didn't talk much, and maybe that was why people liked him so quickly. He said he worked in logistics, scheduling truck routes between different states. Sometimes, during dinner or a movie night, he'd pull out his phone to answer work messages. His complaints about work sounded real enough. Nothing too dramatic, just everyday frustrations. For about 8 months, we dated. At first, everything felt normal, but slowly, small things started to feel off. Trevor began showing up late to my place sometimes, with a limp or a wrapped wrist. He told me he'd been mugged at a gas station in Wisconsin once, and another time he said he had a slipped disc that kept him from driving for a week. Whenever I asked for more details or showed concern, Trevor would quickly change the subject. He'd talk about how lonely he'd been before we met, trying to make me feel sorry for him. It was subtle, but looking back, I realized it was a way to avoid answering the questions that made him uncomfortable. One night, I saw an unexpected email notification pop up on his laptop. The sender's name wasn't his. It said something like Brennan C. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the inbox. What I found was a collection of messages from women I didn't know. Some of the messages were angry, others confused and heartbroken. I took screenshots as fast as I could, my hand shaking, and sent them to myself without letting him know I saw anything. The next morning, he was gone, completely vanished. His clothes, toiletries, everything that belonged to him was missing. His phone was off, and he had deleted or disabled all his social media accounts. I wanted to believe I was overreacting, that maybe there was an explanation, but my gut told me otherwise. Determined to understand what was happening, I started following the clues in those messages. I looked up one of the usernames, which led me to a private Instagram account. The profile picture was of a woman standing in front of a mural I recognized from a cafe in Milwaukee. I nervously sent her a cautious message, saying I thought I had some information about someone she knew. I honestly didn't expect her to reply, but she did. Later that day, she messaged me back, "Are you talking about Brennan or Joel?" I froze. She introduced herself as Jamie, and we ended up talking on the phone for hours. Jamie told me about her time with Joel, the name Trevor went by with her. She said he was very similar to Trevor, attentive, funny, private about certain things, but open in ways that made her feel special. Joel told Jamie he had a rare heart condition and needed money for emergency medications that his insurance wouldn't cover. Jamie helped him pay for these meds, giving him a few $100s at a time. By the time she realized what was going on, she had lost nearly $3,000, and Joel had vanished without a word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jamie's story, about the tiny details that matched what I'd seen, the pauses in his speech, the little jokes, the sad moments that felt real. It was all part of the same act. I kept digging. Over the next few days, I found 2 more online profiles that looked like him, but with different names and jobs. One was Matt Castle, a freelance photographer. The other went by Shane Gordon, a startup consultant from Chicago. I created burner accounts and sent each a message, but neither replied. Still, their friends lists were revealing. I recognized several women from the email inboxes I had screenshots of. I wasn't the only one he had hurt. About a week later, I joined a video call with another woman, Rebecca. She was a high school English teacher from Iowa, and she looked tired, like someone who had been through a lot. Rebecca told me about her nearly year-long relationship with Shane. He'd convinced her he'd gotten a job offer in her city. He asked her to co-sign a short-term apartment lease so he could move in when everything was ready. He never showed up, and now Rebecca is still responsible for paying the penalties on the lease. She said to me, "I think he studies people, figures out the kind of story you want to hear, like some experiment. That way, he knows exactly what will work." Hearing this broke my heart, but it also gave me a sense of control. I started keeping a notebook by my bed where I wrote down every name he used, every lie he told, every detail that repeated or conflicted. I wasn't trying to build a legal case. I just wanted to keep a record so I wouldn't forget what really happened. Patterns emerged quickly. The same jokes kept showing up in different conversations, the same vague stories about childhood, family, or work. He recycled impressive job titles that were hard to verify, like independent logistics consultant or remote systems analyst. It was all designed to sound important and trustworthy. Eventually, I filed a police report, but I didn't expect much to happen. Jamie and Rebecca had filed reports too, in their own towns. Since he didn't steal huge sums and changed his names and emails so often, the police had limited options. One detective was honest with me. He said, "Guys like this float around. They disappear when things get rough, then come back looking for their next target." That description stuck with me. It made Trevor sound like some kind of parasite, living off the people who trusted him before moving on to find more. After that, I took a long break from dating. I moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts. I wanted a fresh start, far away from everything that had happened. But sometimes I still get messages from women who find my story online. They ask if I knew him by his other names, Jared, Noah, Ellis. I always say yes, because I know the pattern now, the ever-changing faces and fake lives he builds to trap people. The last I heard, someone spotted him working out of a co-working space in Minneapolis using a new name, Avery Dalton. He was pitching some kind of app to freelancers. I didn't follow up. I knew it was better not to get pulled back into his web again.
The afternoon started just like any other, everything falling into its usual routine, until it abruptly changed in the blink of an eye. There was an unusual heaviness in the air, making each minute feel like an hour. Across the room stood a man named Luca, holding a gun and pacing back and forth. He was muttering about the failures of the system, about how companies played with people's futures as if it was all luck. His voice trembled with emotion and bitter disappointment as he told me about his wife, how she had begged him to do whatever it took to help her. With every word, I could feel the storm of anger and pain building inside him. Suddenly, sirens pierced the silence, faint at first, but quickly growing loud enough to shake the windows. Blue and red lights flashed outside. Police had arrived. One officer called out, steady and careful, introducing himself and trying to reassure Luca and defuse the situation. Luca just laughed a hollow laugh, refusing to believe there was any way out. He looked defeated, knees bent, voice breaking as he said I'd never understand how complicated this all was, how people with power could decide the value of a life. The next moments blurred together. I watched as a tiny red dot appeared on Luca's chest, just above the line of his jacket. Then, a single, deafening shot echoed through the room. He dropped to the ground, the gun clattering away, and blood instantly soaking his shirt. Before I could move, the police burst in, shouting over each other as they scanned the scene for threats. I remember crouching under my desk, completely frozen, as they carried Luca's body away. His face was pale, his eyes wide open but empty. I felt glued to the floor, unable to breathe. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I would wake up in a cold sweat, haunted by the sound of that gunshot and the memory of Luca's warning voice echoing in my mind, telling me I wasn't really safe. News broke soon after, and his story was everywhere. Luca Romano, 29, once considered a rising star, brought down after giving up hope on the world. It was the kind of tragedy that made headlines. Weeks passed, then something else happened that rattled the city all over again. News reports told how the CEO of a big insurance company in the heart of downtown, a man named Henry Clark was shot and killed. Police were looking for one suspect, a man named Daniel Lee. When they found him out of state a few days later, Daniel was carrying a homemade silencer and pages of writing against corporate greed in healthcare. He insisted he wasn't guilty, but his case exploded in the media. Debates filled the air about whether he was fighting a hopeless system or just causing more pain. At work, things got tense. I never considered myself social, and winter holidays always made me want to disappear. Nights dragged on as I scrolled my phone behind the safety of my desk, hoping the hours would speed up. Around 2 a.m., colleagues in my building trickled out for the night, laughing and saying goodbye. Soon only a few of us remained, doing our usual late shift routines. By 3 a.m., the building was eerily quiet. Then, out of nowhere, a loud bang echoed down the hall, like someone had dropped a heavy object. I froze, telling myself it was nothing, but the anxiety building in my chest disagreed. I decided to make coffee to shake off the unease. Stepping into the break room, I noticed something changed. The air felt too still. As I glanced toward the dining area, I caught a glimpse of a figure. At first I didn't believe my eyes, but there was no mistaking it. Daniel was standing there, tall and motionless, face hidden by a blank black mask. The overhead light glinted off a long, sharp knife in his hand. Terror shot through me. Instinctively, I ducked behind the table, pressing myself flat against the floor. I could feel my heart pounding so hard, I was sure it would give me away. The door closed quietly behind him, and the silence stretched, broken only by Daniel's uneven breathing. My stomach twisted when I saw the knife again, now dripping with blood that left a dark trail along the floorboards. I wanted to cry out, to run, but my limbs wouldn't budge. Daniel moved through the room with the calm of someone who'd done this before, each step slow and deliberate. He drifted toward the hallway where my coworkers Maria and Sam usually took their breaks. I crawled desperately toward a tall planter in the corner, squeezing myself behind it and trying to silence my panicked gasps. Through the narrow gap in the door, I saw Daniel ease open the break room where Sam slept during night shifts. Sam's voice cut through the quiet, asking what Daniel was doing, shaky and confused. Daniel muttered something in response. What followed was a horrible, guttural sound that made my blood freeze, and then red splashed against the wall. I pressed both hands over my face, trembling, trying not to sob out loud. Time seemed to dissolve. For a moment, Daniel's featureless mask turned toward the hallway, scanning the shadows with eyes that felt ice cold even when I couldn't see them. He took one slow step toward the planter where I had hidden. I pleaded in my head for him to move on. Just when I thought he might find me, he turned away and drifted down the hall, vanishing into the quiet. I stayed curled up there until sunlight crept through the blinds, too scared to move. When I finally stood, the corridors were full of police, the air thick with cleaning chemicals and the metallic tang of blood. Yellow tape zigzagged everywhere. An officer came over, gently guiding me outside, treating me like a child lost in chaos. I watched paramedics and reporters swarm the sidewalk. Everywhere I looked, people whispered theories. 4 lives lost for no clear reason and no answers. The building's mood never recovered. Each day brought a new news segment, speculation, and wild rumors. About a year later, the police finally caught someone. Daniel Smith, a grad student in criminal psychology. They'd seen his car nearby that night and matched his DNA from a knife sheath found in the building. Even with answers, nothing erased the fear that clung to the walls. Nights still haunt me. I see those hollow eyes in my nightmares, waiting and watching, always ready to remind me that sometimes true danger hides behind the faces we least expect.